So although I am indeed an Xbox YouTuber from time to time on this channel, I do like to talk about Nintendo stuff. Now, I wasn't going to talk about the weird Pikmin animated thing. I'm not really a huge Pikmin guy to begin with. I don't really care about animations with a mother and child reunion. Doesn't really do much for me. But of course, the Nintendo Switch 2 has had a lot of good press with things like system sales and stuff like that. But one thing that is obviously still a bit of an issue with the system are some third-party and some independent games coming over to the system. Now, it seems like there has been a lack of development kits. This is something that we've talked about numerous times on the channel and has indeed been corroborated by undisclosed third-party and independent developers when it comes to their desires to put games onto the Nintendo Switch 2, as talked about by places like Digital Foundry, who talk to various game developers at various conferences such as Gamescom. Now, there's been lots of theories as to why this is the case. Of course, Insider Gaming talked about this before the system even launched, and I didn't really put much stock into it. They said it was essentially a 3-phase rollout where it was going to be like mainline priority partners were going to get the first phase of development kits, then more third-party companies were going to get them in the second phase of development kits, and then the third phase of the development kits was kind of, the free-for-all, the eyes wide open, everyone get to the battlefield. You could put your game on the Nintendo Switch 2 at this point in time. And it seems like as time has gone on, this is kind of ringing a lot truer than maybe some people initially expected. Well, a couple of days ago, a story popped up, and I wanted to talk about this because I kind of disagree with what is being said here. And I don't know if this person is just giving this as an opinion. I don't know if this person is trying to position this as a factual thing, but regardless of the situation and regardless of the reasoning to it, I do want to talk about it because this tweet seemed to become very popular and people just kind of accepted exactly what it said at face value and then just moved on with their day. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm not quite sure that I necessarily agree with this, because I think there's a bit of a conversation to be had here. So this is coming to us from a Twitter user, Reese Kiwi Talks Riley, who is a game developer interviewer, interviewed over 100 game devs. I'm most well known for my Retro Studios, Valve, Bethesda interviews, 13 million plus views on YouTube. And they took to the tweeters, the X, whatever the hell you want to call it, and we're talking and essentially replying to a post that was made saying, 4 months after launch, Nintendo Switch 2 dev kits are unavailable for 95% of us indie devs. Thank God for backwards compatibility. So this Brock the Brawl is obviously an independent developer. I mean, they got a decent size following. I'm not familiar with their games, but obviously a lot of people that I follow do indeed follow them. So, they must have a decent size name when it comes to the indie sphere. Well, instead of just kind of going with the initial thing that we've all been kind of assuming was the case, this tweet popped up and I was like, okay, I have to respond to this. The reason Nintendo is not providing dev kits is they are trying to lessen the shovelware problem Switch 1 has. They would rather indie devs just use Switch 1 dev kits in most cases. They don't want the Switch 2 eShop overrun with shovelware slop. And it is also to ensure the big third parties get seen more on the eShop and don't get buried by shovelware. 2026 is the year of big third parties on Switch 2, and Nintendo wants to ensure they succeed, as it creates a positive feedback loop for Nintendo, so expect the dev kit issue to continue for a good while. This is a deliberate tactic by Nintendo. And if you're posing this as an opinion, in my opinion, the reason why, okay, I probably wouldn't say anything. But the fact of the matter is that this is being presented as a factual thing. Nintendo is essentially limiting third-party companies and independent developers because, let's be real here, yes, there is a lot of independent slop out there, but there's a lot of very talented independent companies as well. Indies are filling the gap between these big AAA releases from first-party studios on numerous platforms. So to kind of lump everything together, I feel is a little bit disingenuous, but I do understand the shovelware slop thing. Now, we can get into the whole point that the cream of the crop rises to the top. And more often than not, games that are actually good will sell better than games that are actually not good. Of course, there are outliers and there are instances of that not happening. But if somebody's going to an eShop and seeing, the Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, and then seeing like Cow Tipping Simulator, and they decide to purchase Cow Tipping Simulator over Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, that's a personal choice. I don't, you see what I'm saying? Like, I guess the browsability is kind of what we're talking about here. But one thing I find to be extremely interesting in all of this is that, they would rather indie devs just use Switch 1's dev kits in most cases, so you're getting an inferior product. You're getting an inferior version of the game, because obviously if they had a Switch 2 dev kit, the game would be more optimized for the Switch 2. We've seen games come out that probably should have been 60 frames per second, but they were Switch 1 releases, and so the Switch 1 version was lagging behind, but there is no dedicated Switch 2 version of the game. So now the consumer is just like, oh, well, I could buy the crappier version of the game since, they didn't give this company a Switch 2 dev. Like, that makes no sense to me. That seems like such illogical thinking, because you're essentially blaming the consumer because you can't control the crap that's put out onto your eShop. But here's the thing. They don't want they're trying to lessen the shovelware problem. They want more third parties to get seen more on the eShop and don't get buried by shovelware. But let's take a look at the actual eShop here. So I'm under recent releases here, and you could see, there is a blend here of Switch 1 and Switch 2 games. It's not necessarily separated, and I know that you can separate it. Oh, Scourge, I remember that game on the was it the DS? Or was it Game Boy Advance? Maybe it was Game Boy Advance. That's kind of cool. Sorry, got distracted here, but it's not exactly a clean cut thing, because most people are just gonna look on the basic eShop. Okay, well, what about coming soon? I don't want my game to get buried under coming soon. I want to be able to promote this game. Well, let's look here. Switch 1, Switch 1, Switch 1, Switch 1, Switch 1, Switch 1. Like a rap shop. This could have been a huge hit with a Switch 2 version of the game, but now Rap Shop is stuck on the Nintendo Switch 1. But what I'm saying is, the discoverability isn't necessarily all that much better. Yes, you can go over to a tab and choose to only look at Switch 2 stuff, but the Switch 1 stuff is completely integrated into this thing. You could have made an eShop where the focal point was just Switch 2, and you had to go to a specific place and a different place in order to access Switch 1 things, but you didn't do that. That was a conscious decision that you made to integrate everything into one place. So going back to this, how much of this is actually true? They don't want the Switch 2 eShop overrun with shovelware slop. Well, the rap game, I don't think is exactly, going to light the world on fire as a Switch 1 game that pops up on my Nintendo Switch 2, which is right here. So I guess my thing is, I just don't buy this reasoning. And if this was positioned as an opinion piece, then sure. But like this tweet is doing numbers, and people are oh, I'm such a sneaky boy, aren't I? Aren't I a sneaky boy? Mr. Suggiano, no. Source on this: generally curious, as there has been lots of reporting regarding lack of Switch 2 dev kit availability, even for AAA studios, which is true. And then I, of course, said my little thing because I'm an asshole. Switch 2 and 1 share the same eShop. Your entire argument is invalid now. You obviously don't know that you could separate them on multiple pages on the eShop and on websites as well. So no, it's not invalid. Well, yeah, you can separate them. But here's the thing. By default, they are not separated. We're talking about a default thing. I just showed you the default thing for bestsellers and coming soon, which is littered with Switch 1 and Switch 2 games intertwined. So my whole point is, I think that this is nonsense. I think this is nonsense. I think Nintendo just has an idea in mind, and this is what they're going to do. I don't think it has anything to do with, oh, we want to cut down on the eShop slop. Because if it really was, you could just be like, hey, this game is garbage. All right, this game sucks ass. It's an asset flip. We're not approving this game. All right, you can go to hell. You can go to hell and you die. But no, they allow it because why wouldn't you? It's money on your eShop. If somebody buys that game, you get a percentage of that money. So you're going to reject money? You know, it's either about money or quality. There is no kind of in between with this. And to kind of make it like, oh, well, Nintendo is doing this because they care about you. It's like, come on, pal. Come on, Reese Riley. But like I said, this is just my opinion. I am not stating this as fact, although I have talked to some indie developers who disagree with this sentiment, but I'm just positioning this as my opinion based on what I have looked at, based on the things that I know. I'm not saying it is a definitive thing, but when you say something is kind of definitive, and I have a feeling that that's not the case, I might say something about it. No ill will. Don't send no disrespect to Reese. I'm sure Reese is a very nice person. Maybe I'll talk to Reese one day, and we'll be pals. We can play WWE 2K25 on GameShare because nobody plays that shit besides me. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comments section down below. How do you view this? Do you think that limiting Switch 2 dev kits so you end up with crappier Switch 1 versions of games is a good idea? Do you think that they are trying to curb the shovelware on the Nintendo Switch 2? Or do you think that it's a bunch of poppycock? Because I do. And as always, thank you guys for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Hit the bell as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.